"12 rounds into the 2020 Formula One season, and the technical battle is beginning to wind down, but not stop altogether. Priorities are changing for the teams. As the next season is coming on, the regulations are quite similar for 2021, but the 2020 season is far from over. There are teams that are still fighting to get that first point on the board or locked in really difficult scraps to try and move themselves up the Constructors' Championship. And don't forget, it's the Constructors' Championship that pays the big prize money, not the Drivers' Championship. And one team that's really fighting for that first point of the season is Williams. Now, I thought this is more of a point of interest, just something that caught my attention during Free Practice 1 earlier today, was Williams were taking a lot of attention with their very on-brand FlowViz dye around the barge board. You can see the mechanic here spraying it in all over the different elements on the Williams barge board. Now, as the car comes out of the garage, you can see quite clearly some of the little design features on the car. Now, none of these bits are particularly new for Portugal, but it's something we haven't really covered enough, I thought, on this show so far. And as you can see, I'll just pause it there, you can see these little vortex generators running along the top of this element of the barge board. Now, this is something Williams have been running for a few races they introduced earlier in the year. They don't always run with this setup, but it's clear the team is still analysing how to get the most out of the flow around this part of the car. This could be feeding directly into their 2021 project, or it could be just a last gasp attempt to try and get a bit more performance out of the car going into the end of the 2020 season. But I thought I'd just carry on that clip, because when the car comes back into the garage, you get a really good look at how the teams actually analyse this. And you can see that flash. It's as simple as this. A mechanic brings out a digital camera, decent high-end one with a big old flash on it, and photographs the FlowViz dye on that part of the car, and the team engineers back at the factory in Wantage in England will be staring at those photos and trying to understand if it does really tie up with what they see in CFD and what they see in the wind tunnel. The next thing I wanted to show you, a bit like the first, is another thing that's not exactly new for Portugal, but has been attracting a lot of interest on internet forums. In fact, there's been a huge amount of speculation about this. It's Red Bull's front wing end plate, and if you can just about see on this version, there's a little slit that appears to run along the very bottom of the front wing end plate. And it's raised a few questions about, well, is it legal, is it not? Have they found a loophole? Does that little slit link to a couple of small holes on the rear face of the end plate? Or does it link all the way through the front wing to something on the rear of the car? Aping a little bit of what Mercedes used to do back in the day of Michael Schumacher when they first discovered the double DRS. Now, I'm not convinced by any of that at the moment, but it is certainly an area of interest. We do know that Red Bull were experimenting with something on their front wing during free practice. Max Verstappen was not very happy with it and got on the radio and said that front wing turned his car into the handling of perhaps a drift car. And we know the Red Bull RB16's already got a bit of an instability problem in certain types of corner. Alex Albon was suffering as well. Could this be a contributing factor to that handling issue, or is this just Red Bull pushing the envelope? We're yet to fully see, and we've yet to have really good footage of this device, if it even is a device, at work. So it's one to watch, and we'll be keeping an eye on it in the races to come. Now, moving on to the dramas and trouble of the team that we've been talking about all season long. Ever since pre-season testing, we've been saying, what's wrong at Ferrari? How are they going to fix it? Well, Ferrari have been asking themselves the same question. It does look like they might be on the right path, though. They've brought on a lot of updates in recent races. Here at the Russian Grand Prix, they had these little elements, and they'd run these a few times during the season, these little elements underneath the nose. This is in sort of Ferrari's answer to having a full-size cape like McLaren or Mercedes and some of the other teams do. This is their way of dealing with the Y250 vortex, that big cyclone of wind that comes off in that gap between the end of the front wing cascade and that flat FIA section of the front wing. Managing that flow is super important to how the car works further back on the leading edge of the floor. Well, in the Portuguese Grand Prix, and I think they also had it at the last race in the Nürburgring, you have these little, I like to call them sort of dinosaur necks, sort of brontosaurus necks, that just run along the side. Now that's just a bit of fine tuning could really work well with the Y250 vortex that runs just through this region. And if they get that right, and it does appear they have done, they will get much better flow across the leading edge of the car's floor, but also around the side pod and up to those elements that you'll see in the barge board area. That's a really critical development for the team, and it would have taken them an awful long time to develop. But they haven't just stopped there. The barge board itself has come along apace. This is the version they brought to the Russian Grand Prix. Just for really comparison purposes, you can see this big long upper section. You can see this section here, which isn't highlighted, but there's certain chord and curve on that. And then moving back, you can see the highlighted section right at the front there. And then you can see these sort of inverted L shapes or backwards L shapes along the side of the barge board. Well, coming into the Portuguese Grand Prix, and again, they had a version of this at the Nürburgring, that leading edge section, you can see it's much slimmer, it's much shorter, and then there's a different shape on both of those upper elements in the barge board cluster. I don't really know what we call these, they're not really barge boards anymore. And then those invert L shapes are completely different. So again, Ferrari trying to manage the airflow around the side of their car. Something particularly interesting that Ferrari had at the Portuguese Grand Prix was on their rear floor. Now, take a look at the rear floor on the car that they normally run, with these slotted sections all the way along the back up to the rear wheel. That's to do with controlling the airflow over and around the rear wheel and trying to seal the side of the diffuser and generate a bit more downforce. In scrutineering at the Portuguese Grand Prix, however, Ferrari brought along this. All the slots were gone. Not a thing to be seen, it's just all those slots and slats are gone. It's not that Ferrari are no longer trying to exploit that area of the car, they absolutely are. But what they're also doing is they're developing a floor that will work for the 2021 technical regulations, where all of those slots and slits are all completely banned. Ferrari, by doing this, have a little bit of a head start on almost every type of team on the grid by running a floor like that on a real car. Most of them have only run it in the wind tunnel or in CFD. McLaren, though, have also done this. They tried it at the Belgian Grand Prix and took their lessons away from that. Now, Ferrari will be going back to Maranello with all of this data, looking at it, and that will feed very much into the 2021 car project, which is a big change to this year's car, and hoping for the Italian fans that it's going to be far more competitive. So Ferrari's performance updates have been paying off, and we can see that by looking at data from the Eiffel Grand Prix in Germany at the Nürburgring just a couple of weeks ago. Mercedes, of course, fastest car. They're the datum. They don't move forwards or backwards on this graph. But look, Red Bull have caught up a bit, so have Renault. Racing Point have caught up. But for the first time this season, Ferrari have started to catch up to Mercedes, and that's a big improvement for them. McLaren, that new nose package has not been working too well for them. They're going backwards a bit, but once they understand it, they could start to move forwards. However, that is great news for Ferrari. They're beginning to improve, and if that starts going in the way they want it to, they really could make some big steps before the end of the season, and we'll see what this data shows from the Portuguese Grand Prix, and we'll take a look at that during the free practice session at Imola. Of course, only one free practice session there.